Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Ank. I'm the CEO of Servio Capital, the co-developer of the Caribe Seaside. And I want to introduce to you guys here today a prominent attorney in the area, Jule Herbert. Jule has been practicing law for the past 50 years, but Jule is actually a very prominent attorney, and he was very important for us to have on this project as part of the legal team because he has actually created the instrument of purchasing pre-construction condos, and he created it with the additional benefit of being able to use a 1031 exchange, which, of course, if you know anything about 1031 exchanges, that gives you the ability to not get taxed on your capital gains. But I just wanted to invite him here to explain briefly just the history of how we came to creating the option agreement as a way to take down pre-construction condos, and then go into why you should use 1031 exchange if you have that option, how it should be used, the mechanics of it, and then lastly, how people can reach out to Jule if they have any questions, if they want to take it down. So why don't you just start, give us the background, give us the full history on how it came about.
Thank you. The evolution of 1031 exchanges in this country has now made it possible to do things that were not considered doable as recently as 15 or 20 years ago. So I think we should have a little bit of a background as to what happened with the 1031 exchange deal over the years. Back in the 60s, and before that, 1031 exchange was on the books, but it was generally considered that involved a simultaneous exchange. In the late 70s, there was a case called the Starker case out of the Ninth Circuit on the West Coast. And a lot of the 1031 law has been developed in the area of California, Washington, Oregon, for whatever reason. But anyway, in 1979, the Starker decision came out and it allowed a delayed exchange where the relinquished property, which is the property that the exchanger owns to begin with, was given up to somebody under an agreement where the replacement property wasn't delivered for several years. So that's step one. In reaction to that, the IRS, which lost the case, went to Congress to try to rein it in. And a lot of people remember the 1984 Tax Reduction Act, which was also the Deficit Reduction Act. So it had a tax component and a raising tax component. And one of the things in that bill limited 1031s and came up with the 45-day rule for identification of replacement property. And it came up with the 180-day rule for the receipt of your replacement property. If it takes 180 days, you have to receive your replacement property in 180 days. The thinking was immediately you can't use 1031 to exchange into pre-construction condo developments that take 2, 3, 70 months or whatever to complete. And that was the case. But what some of us were doing at that point were exchanging contracts for contracts, which back then were considered personal property. The regs didn't come out after 84 until 1992. And that's when the IRS solidified some of the rules and tried to make them as difficult as possible. But anyway, along comes the 2017 tax relief bill of President Trump, which was enacted in his first year of his first term. And one of the compromises in that bill was to do away with 1031 treatments for personal property and restricted it to real property only. That led to the question of what is real property, because it had never been an issue because it didn't matter. You could use personal property against personal property, whatever. So the general thinking in the statute was we'll just defer to whatever the state law is on real property. But there was also a mandate for the IRS to come up with regulations to flush that out. And the regulations that came out in December of 2020 came up with a new concept of real property. It wasn't new in the general text, but it was new in the context of 1031 exchanges, which is a person could exchange into what was called intangible real property, regardless of what the state law was. Specifically in that regulation, it said option agreements are considered intangible real property assuming that the value of the option is derived from the underlying value of the real property, and left it at that. So if you can structure an option agreement that allows someone to come in and identify the option agreement itself as the replacement property, then you finesse the 180-day rule, because you don't have to wait till the thing is built, because the receipt of the option itself is replacement property. Some states have in place the entire way that a condominium can be built, including literally the purchase agreements themselves, and have not been able to adjust to this rule. This happened in December of 2020. It was actually after the election. The Biden people came in, and the consensus was this might not last very long. But in fact, it did. They did not come up and change it. So now, by acquiring an option agreement as your replacement property, you can complete a 1031 exchange. And I think it's very valuable because of the fact that if you use a 1031 exchange, you have a lot more money to acquire your replacement property than you would otherwise have if you have to use after-tax funds to do it. So anyway, I'm very happy with what we have, and it works. Yeah. It's not there are some pitfalls that you need to avoid. And one of those is you can't receive something as replacement property that you already own. So you have to be very careful in structuring the option agreement such that you don't acquire that before you've given up your relinquished property.
Obviously, as those that are watching, they could tell that you've got significant amount of knowledge based on a lot of things. And so you structured this option agreement for the purchase of these condos in a way that kind of hits all of those legal guardrails. I think the next question, probably one of the most important question that you already answered, is why should it be used? And you answered that by saying you have a lot more money because you're not getting taxed on your previous property. My question now is, how are you seeing people typically use these, the ones that are using them effectively? How are they using it, and how does that kind of play out in real timelines?
I see a lot of people who have been buying property for short-term rentals over the years have found that that's a program they like. But they also find that newer, better, fancier, better looking rental property, especially in vacation areas on the Gulf of Mexico, is more profitable. So they want to upgrade their 8 and 10-year-old properties to the newest and best thing. And this is a way they can maintain their investment in real estate, roll it over in a tax-free basis into a brand new property that avoids the thing that comes up over time when you have an older rental property. You've exhausted some of your depreciation. You don't get it's just time to move on to a new project for the purposes of maintaining your cash flow.
Yeah, that makes sense. Look, thank you so much for coming on and explaining and going through the mechanics of it. I think that for most people, it'd probably be beneficial for them to have a personal conversation with you if this is something that you're considering doing when purchasing a condo at the Crebe Seaside. My recommendation would be, always talk to the guy who knows the most about it, and that guy's Jule Herbert. So, Jule, can you give everyone your information if they want to contact you?
Be happy to. And it's important before you start signing things and option agreements that you understand what it is that you're trying to do so that you don't get ahead of yourself. I'm here in Gulf Shores, 251-968-4764, Herbert at herbertlawfirm.com. And I'd be happy to speak to anyone who needs the background. Obviously, what we've done today is it's not legal advice. It's not purport to create any sort of attorney relations concept. And we have a separate QI entity that actually works with you and handles the contracts between the qualified intermediary, which is the entity that actually helps you do the exchange. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that has further questions.
Thank you so much, Jule. It's really good to have you part of the legal team on this one and the experience and your track record. You've worked with a number of very prominent developers in using this exact instrument as the way of acquisition. And you've come up with something really creative that helps people save money and give less to Uncle Sam. So that I appreciate more than anything else, and I'm sure everybody else does too. So thanks again. I appreciate it. And again, guys, we'll put his contact information as well in the description of the video so that you guys have access to that. Thanks again, Jules.
All right, it's good to talk to you.